This will be your first Keystone review video. I'm going to start from the beginning of the year. We're going to start with the characteristics of life today. I'm going to go over the most important ones, group a few of them together, and then there will be more videos to come. I talked to you guys and I said, hey, what would be better for you? Longer videos and not a big amount, maybe like 6 or 7, or would you rather short, choppy videos? And you guys said short ones. So I'm going to try to keep these like 10 minutes each instead of like 30 or 40 minutes, which I was going to do. So just to start off, characteristics of life. These are things that every single living creature has that makes them be considered living. So to start off, and I'm going to go over some basic vocab, guys. We went over at the beginning of the year just to kind of refresh our minds on all that. Every single organism is going to need a constant supply of energy. And when we talked about energy, there was 2 different ways that we got our energy depending on what type of organism we are. We had our autotrophs, and our autotrophs were organisms that were able to make their own energy. In other words, they were able to use something that they had easy access to, and they were able to take that and convert it into food. These are things like plants. Okay? So plants, guys, they're going to go through photosynthesis. They can convert light energy from the sun into chemical energy in the form of glucose in their bodies. And that glucose is just sugar. We'll learn that more with the macromolecule review. But our autotrophs, these are plants, they can make their own energy. The other one we had, and this is us, we are heterotrophs. We are unable to make our own energy. So these are things like animals. I'll put fungi in here too. I know fungi, guys, it looks like a plant, mushrooms, things like that. But if you ever notice, fungi are always growing right next to a plant. They're actually kind of parasites to the plant. What they do is they take some of the nutrients from the plant and that the plant would be getting from the ground, and they use it for their own personal gain. So the heterotrophs, guys, you cannot make your own food. Sure, you can go to the kitchen and be like, hey, I'm gonna make a sandwich. That's not making your own food. That food was made by something else, and you're using it for energy. So just so you guys know, you can't make your own food. Our second one, it has to be made of cells. 2 vocab words for this, we had unicellular and multicellular. Unicellular, the prefix uni means 1. So unicellular were organisms made up of 1 cell. Prefix multi means many. So multicellular organisms are organisms that are made up of many cells. And that's all I'm going to go into there. Piggybacking off of made of cells, we got to have levels of organization. Now, when I'm talking about levels of organization, guys, I'm going to just talk about going all the way down to the atom. We would have the atom, put a few atoms together, we get a molecule. If we put a bunch of molecules together, and this is just on a biology basis, we would get an organelle. So things that make up our cells. They're the tiny organs that are inside of our cells. But for our levels of organization, I'm going to start with, once we put a bunch of organelles together, we're going to get the cell. Okay? Put cells together, we get more complex, we get a tissue. No, these are not the things that you sneeze in. Tissues, these are going to be like muscle tissue in your body, that's the type of tissue. But when we put our tissues together, we're going to get organs, things like your stomach, your liver, your kidneys, your intestines, things like that. All right? Put some organs together, we get organ systems. Something like the digestive system made up of your esophagus, your stomach, your small intestines. And then lastly, once we put enough organ systems together for us, we get you, an organism. So these are the levels of organization for us. They're made up of all those. For some organisms, for us, it's a lot to do. We're very complex. For some organisms like bacteria, their levels of organization isn't as complex as ours. But since we were going over cells, guys, let me give you some vocab words other than multicellular and unicellular for cells. We also have two different types of cells. We have our prokaryotes, and I'll go over this a little bit more in another video. We have our eukaryotes. If you guys remember, prokaryotes, they do not have a nucleus, so not the center globule of the cell that contains the DNA. Sure, they still have DNA, but they do not have a nucleus that houses the DNA. They also do not have any organelles. Eukaryotes, this is us, they do have a nucleus and they do have organelles. So eukaryotes, these are us, we have a nucleus, we have organelles. Prokaryotes, no nucleus, no organelles. These are things like bacteria, very simple things, right? Moving on from there, our next characteristic of life, we're going to grow, and I'll group two of them together. We're also going to be able to reproduce. Most organisms, guys, they can reproduce. It's when we start to get into hybrid organisms that things get a little tricky. The liger, we talked about him earlier in the year, or her. It is a male lion mixed with a female tiger, and the offspring of that, the liger, is unable to reproduce. So we don't really consider the liger a species because in order to be a species, you have to be able to reproduce, and your offspring, which would be the liger, also has to be able to reproduce. We call that producing fertile offspring. Fertile meaning it's able to reproduce. So that's why the liger isn't really considered a species. All right. Our next one, maintain homeostasis. We talked about homeostasis earlier in the year. Homeostasis is just maintaining your internal conditions. You want them to be the same. So our body temperature, we want it to be at 98.6 degrees. We'll talk about in another video what happens when it kind of gets away from normal. But you guys know if you got a fever of 102, you're not going to do anything that day. You're going to sit in bed. You're not going to have any energy. You're going to try to get your body temperature back to normal. Obviously, you're not going to school that day. Another thing for homeostasis other than temperature, so we have temperature. Also, pH. pH is going to be our acid and our base levels. We want our body to be roughly a pH of 7. If you remember your chart, guys, it goes from 0 all the way to 14. 7's in the middle. We have our acids on this side. We have our bases on the other side. Okay? The further it gets away from 7, 7's like water. So 6, it's like soda pop. 5, maybe orange juice. If we get all the way down to 0, these are really, really, really strong acids. And going all the way to 14, these are really, really, really strong bases. They're equally as bad. For acids, I know like if you're like at a 1, it's like sulfuric acid. It's really bad, can burn skin right off your hands. But there's some acids in our body that actually we want to be very acidic. For example, your stomach acid is probably around here, probably about a 2. We want your stomach to have the acid in there because what happens is you eat your food, you chew it, it breaks it down, but then when you get into your stomach, the stomach acid takes that food and it breaks it down even more. So some parts of our body we actually want to be away from 7, but mostly in our body we want us to be neutral or a pH of 7. All right, so next one. We want to be able to respond to stimuli. And when I'm talking about respond to stimuli, guys, what I mean is not only being able to move, because all organisms don't move, but kind of being able to respond to your environment. I'm not talking about like your brother or your sister here being like, you know, tapping you on the shoulder like, hey, I want to play the PlayStation, you know, and then you finally like, all right already. You know, it doesn't always have to be a movement or something like that. Let's talk about plants. Okay, I've never seen a plant get up out of the ground, uproot itself, and be walking down the street going like, hey, you going to McDonald's? Like, no, it doesn't really work like that. But plants can move. So let's say the plant's here, it's pointing straight up. Early in the day, if the sun's over there, the plant is actually going to move its leaves and move its stem a little bit to face the sun. That way it gets more direct sunlight and it's able to photosynthesize a little bit better. But as the day goes on, the sun is going to move from over here and it's going to slowly go, rises in the east, sets in the west. It's going to go to the other side, and the plant is actually going to move with the sun so that it can continue to photosynthesize. All right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these are your most important ones here, guys. There's one more. We got to be able to evolve. Okay, and that one, it is a characteristic of life. It's probably not as important as the other ones for you personally, because evolution takes, a very long time, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years to happen. But we have different adaptations, and those adaptations make us more fit than other people. So when we evolve, our adaptations become better suited for our environment. Go back to Darwin and his finches. Every finch ate a different type of food, and their beaks were all different. So if the beaks were not suited for the environment, no, they didn't just form a different beak, they died. Same thing with Lamarck. If you guys remember, we had Darwin and Lamarck. Lamarck said, okay, we have these giraffes, and we have long-necked giraffes, and we have short-necked giraffes. He said, well, clearly the short-necked giraffes just stretched their necks out, the necks got a little bigger, and they were able to reach the food. No, that didn't happen. The long-necked giraffes were able to get food from the top of the treetops, and the short-necked giraffes, they weren't able to reach the food, so they died. And that's kind of how evolution happens with respect to natural selection. All right? So here's your characteristics of life, guys. Hopefully this helps. There will be more videos to come. Our next video will be going over the cells and talking about differences between prokaryotes, eukaryotes, and plant and animal cells.